Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everyone. It depends on where you are located. My name is Paola Corti, and I am the Senior Open Education Expert at SPARC Europe. This is the 15th ENOEL Workshop in a row. It's part of the series Embrace the Open, and we have members of the European Network of Open Education Librarians facilitating it. Today we have in the room Sylvia Moes from SURF in the Netherlands and David Stöllger from TIB in Germany. Thank you, Sylvia and David, for joining us and for being willing to facilitate this workshop. We also have as our welcome guest Harry Stokhof from University of Applied Sciences in the Netherlands. And I will give the floor immediately to the three of you for leading us through this 15th workshop entitled What Do We Know About Reusing Open Education Content? And the floor is yours.
Yeah, thank you. Sylvia, if it's okay, I will make the start. This is our plan for today. First, I'm going to give a little introduction, introduce our speakers maybe, or give the word to all the speakers to introduce themselves. Then I will talk about preconditions for reuse of OER and a little bit about challenges and opportunities for promoting reuse. And then I will give the floor especially to our guest, Harry Stokhof, who is going to show us a little bit about the empirical work that has been done in the Netherlands, and then Sylvia will wrap that part up, and then we will have discussion in groups about the topics that we will touch on today. About our speakers, Sylvia, if you want to go ahead.
Yes, I'm Sylvia Moes, working at SURF, working on as consultant for open education in infrastructure, international technology standards to make them findable, interoperable, and that kind of things. Also look a little bit to AI, how it can help us finding the materials based on learning goals.
And then we have our esteemed guest, Harry Stokhof, if you want to introduce yourself.
Yeah, sure. I'm Harry Stokhof. I work at the University of Applied Sciences, also in the Netherlands. And my expertise is on teacher education, teachers, and open and curricula, in which also open educational materials are very important. I'm especially interested in how teachers would perceive the use of open educational resources. And that's why we did research together with Sylvia and my colleague Roel Grol into that aspect. And I will tell you a little bit more later on in this workshop.
Yeah, thank you so much. And about myself, I'm David. I'm a researcher and lead at Twilio, which is a repository in Germany for open educational resources. I'm there working on interregional cooperation. I'm originally a philosopher turned librarian, and so I just couldn't hold myself back to give a little bit of introduction into the topics we're going to discuss today. By the end of this workshop, we hope that you have some insights in how we can improve the reuse of open educational resources, what this requires in terms of content creation, what the role of quality, especially of standards, is, how we can make open educational resources easier to find for reuse, especially when it comes to metadata, and how we can work together on the issues for which we do not have answers yet. That concludes the introduction. And so we will start into the preconditions for use of OER. This is just a picture that we'll go through, kind of the dimensions that we identified that could be roughly clustered into personal, structural, and material preconditions, but there might be many ways of doing that. Just in case you have questions, I've so many windows open, I cannot see the chat. Just interrupt me. That's perfectly fine if you have an immediate question, or just wait until the end. We have a Q&A and also a discussion part where you're obviously open to ask questions. As a philosopher, I always want to start at the beginning, and that is kind of to ask maybe the very trivial question, what is reuse? This might seem trivial, but I think in the details it might not be. Because I think it can incorporate actually a spectrum of actions. It can start from simple redistribution, so me just taking an open educational resource and putting it on a platform and distributing it to other people. It can be reused in a very narrow sense of me just taking a material and using it, for example, in a teaching situation. It can include revision, which includes modification of specific materials. It can include remixing, where I take different kinds of materials and remix them together, which some of these actions already include applying a material, for example, in a teaching context. And reuse also includes the aspect of retention. If I take a material and just change everything about it, maybe it's not really reuse. Maybe I've really created something else. So I think it's really important to think about reuse as retaining something from the original. Also, reuse has the dimensions of the range of objects which can be reused. And what we usually see, or when we think about reuse, we usually start with whole resources or even whole courses that are a set of resources. And think about, well, now I have to take all these courses or just all these slides and have to reuse them as a whole set. And that might not be actually the most useful kind of reuse, as we'll see later on, because you can also reuse individual sections or parts. You can even just pick methods, practices, or even more abstract ideas and concepts just as an inspiration. And that may already count as reuse. And connecting to that, I want to offer two hypotheses upon which we have stumbled in our research concerning reuse, which I find really interesting. And the first one is the dark reuse hypothesis, which I want to visualize here as an iceberg. And the typical reuse of kind of just whole courses or slides, just taking them, maybe changing the date, maybe changing the name of the author, and maybe changing some details. That is kind of the reuse that is above the water. That's very visible. That is the reuse where I take a material and almost like citation or reference, say I use that material as a basis for mine. And there we can trace reuse very easily. But when we think about reuse, kind of when it comes to inspiration, when it comes to individual aspects, methods, didactic elements, then we actually talk about a kind of reuse that might be more hidden from view, below the water surface. And that is kind of this dark reuse hypothesis. And I think that's really interesting because for each kind of reuse, there may result different requirements for licenses. For example, if I just reuse a concept or a method and then apply it to a specific context that I want to use it in and wholly reimagine it, I may not even have to put a license on it because the copyright is mine, because I really created something entirely different. The threshold of originality has been reached. And so maybe it's not even visible that I've been inspired by something. Still, and I think it's very helpful and very nice to name inspirations anyway. So even if you're not by copyright kind of required to say where you got your inspirations from, it might still be very nice to do that. But we cannot kind of always rest assured that people do that voluntarily. So many kinds of reuse may just be invisible to us and difficult to trace. Another hypothesis that you find a lot is the reusability paradox. That is a thesis that, as far as I know, has been proposed by David Wiley from the Brigham University in 2002, that states the more a specific material is addressing a pedagogical need within a domain, the bigger its pedagogical value in that specific learning context, but the smaller its potential for reuse more generally. This has been questioned, for example, by Francisca in 2016 and by others. I'm not going to go into the details of their critique. But one aspect they're criticizing is maybe this is just two-dimensional. Potential for reuse may not hinge just on how specific a material is to a specific field, especially if we think about different kinds of materials that can be shared. If we talk about courses, well, if they're specific for one specific field, it's going to be difficult to reuse them, because if you want to apply them to a different field, you have to put in a whole lot of work to change all that different stuff. But if you offer, for example, just a method that you use in a teaching situation, that might be very easy to reuse for others. So maybe this is a simplified picture, but maybe it's also something to keep us or start us thinking about what actually makes a good material for reuse. Maybe more specific for your specific field might not be the best way if you want to have your materials reused. And maybe with the arrival of AI tools, maybe this is not as big of an issue anymore, because now we can just ask AI, well, I like this method, please transfer this method from this specific field to my specific field, and then I just check whether the stuff that I want to get out of it is actually true. But I found these two hypotheses just really, really interesting to kind of start thinking about reuse. I said, well, there's this criticism of the reusability paradox, that it might be just be two-dimensional. And this is why we want to talk about other dimensions of reuse. Here's a selection of the dimensions I want to talk about today, which are knowledge and mindset, criteria of the content within the materials, media and format, technology and software, logo and branding, and metadata. And I will go through these in turn. Let's start with mindset. OER reuse relies on knowledge and mindset. Before reuse, we as educators and librarians need to know a few things and have to have a specific mindset. What we need to know actually is, what is OER in the first place? Hopefully I do not have to explain this in this round. Hopefully because you found your way here, you already know what OER is. That is a great start. But we also need to be comfortable using opening licensing systems. We need to know what kind of license they are, for example, CC Creative Commons licenses, and when we need to apply them. When I, for example, talked about the different objects that can be reused and kind of the threshold of originality that needs to be used, you need to be comfortable knowing when you actually have to apply a certain license and what they entail. And also you need to be aware of where you can find existing OER that satisfy criteria of reusage. And I will build here on the work that has already been done by the ENOEL, especially the workshops that have come before us. There is the workshop of Open Education Librarianship 101. There has already been session 4 and 11. Have delved into this, and there is one upcoming soon. I think the date is not finally set, but workshop 16, so the subsequent one to this one, will again delve into more details into the quality and criteria of OER content. And when it comes to mindset, it is very important that educators are willing and able to publish their materials. That is, on the one hand, a mindset, but it's also something that can be very structural. They need to have the time, they need to have the resources to produce OER or to reuse OER. They need to have the infrastructure to upload the OER they create. And it's very important, I think, to view that, or to see that publication of materials, whether it's reused materials or newly created materials, is an extra step often after a material has been generated for one's teaching. And I think that's very important to kind of think about, that there is maybe an intrinsic motivation, but there is kind of no immediate push from the outside because one has created material that one has to also publish openly that material for others to use. And I think it's very important that we kind of see that this is an extra step that educators do and encourage them to do so. Concerning the question where we can find OER, there already is infrastructure in place. I just want to show 3 options. that are very prominent. OER Commons is a research index that has already over 50,000 materials for schools to universities from all over the world. The ORC, which is also developed at TAB, open source, has over 100,000 materials, mainly for higher education from all over the world. And from my colleagues here from the Netherlands, EduSources has 15,000, more than 15,000 resources for higher education in Dutch and English. And I think it has especially materials for medicine, which I find really, really interesting. So I've actually used that research index a lot. Okay. When it comes to the preconditions of reuse, or especially the criteria, there are a couple I want to mention from the workshop Librarianship 101. And the first one that is introduced there is quality. And there are a couple of questions you can ask yourself in case you want to, or if you're thinking about reusing a material, that can help you to answer the question whether it's worth your time to actually do that. The first question is, does it address your learning outcomes adequately? And if it does, well, maybe you should reuse it. If it doesn't, and you have to put in a whole lot of work, maybe you should look for something else. Does it explain the subject matter very clearly? Again, if it does, you can use it. If it doesn't, well, this is why this asterisk is there. Sometimes that does not need to be a hindrance. Maybe it's a really good method that is applied there. Maybe it's it looks really good. Maybe it is visually appealing and didactically appealing, and you just want to reuse it. Don't be bothered that it is not in your specific subject matter. Sometimes that is the easiest part just to replace. Maybe you can just use the method. Maybe you can just use the idea, the inspiration. And that is already reuse, as we have found out. If it is within your subject matter, you should also ask yourself, does it use high quality scholarly resources? You should always check that yourself, because in the end, even if you're a reuser of an existing OER, it's your responsibility to really make sure that it is sound. Then another question, is it visually appealing or didactically appealing? And if it is, maybe you can use that specific aspect in your reuse. And another question that is very important, how accessible is your content? And we will talk about formats and software and stuff like that in a minute. But accessibility obviously also has something to do with the people that are not only reusing the content, but are actually experiencing the content in a teaching situation. For example, if they have autism, or if they have ADHD, or if they have certain learning impairments or physical impairments, for example, if they're blind, so they need a text reader, stuff like that. And there's already resources out there that can help you assess the quality of OER. For example, scoring criteria for evaluation of open educational resources by University in Dublin, and the OER evaluation tool by achieve.org. The slides will be shared via Zenodo, so if you're interested in the links, just go to Zenodo afterwards and you will find all the links there. Another dimension when it comes to criteria is currency. And that has to do with the fact that digital material can age pretty badly over time, especially when you're like on the fringes or on the right at the edge of cutting edge science. The content can age pretty badly. And so you should ask yourself, when was the research originally created? And if it's really, really old, maybe you should look for something more recent. Has it been updated since? Maybe it's old, but maybe there are a couple of versions that kind of show, well, actually somebody is keeping that updated, and that could be a good reason to reuse something. What new knowledge has been developed on this topic since it was created? And maybe you can add to that. Maybe there is a resource that is already really good, but it just needs to be updated to be up to date. And that could be a good reason to reuse existing material. Does the resource look dated? Especially students are interested in appealing material. And if it just looks old, even though the content is not old, that can just give the impression of it being old. And so it's very important to also have that in mind. Can you maybe incorporate other knowledge into interactive media and resources to renew the look of the resource? And maybe that's much easier than just starting from scratch by yourself. And I've already touched a bit on this with accessibility, relevance to the audience. Is the material accessible to an audience with diverse needs? And there is the Universal Design for Learning, which kind of touches upon some of the elements that can become important here. For example, whether a material has multiple means of engagement, because there are different kinds of learners that should be interested in your material, and that you can offer different ways of acquiring the knowledge or the skills that you actually want to transfer here. Multiple means of representation. People are different, and it's very important that your material also shows that different people with different experiences exist and should be represented in your material. And multiple means of expression. We experience the world differently, and so it's very important that we find ourselves in materials as an expression, that we find ourselves in it, and so have an easier time to engage with the material. And then the kind of the obvious question when it comes to teaching situation, is the content appropriate for the audience level of knowledge? Is it too simple or is it too complex? And here we again touch a little bit on the paradox of reuse. Obviously, more simple materials can be more easily reused, but maybe not as fitting for all levels of education. For example, in university, there are usually very high standards of what is required from teaching, while in school, you may be fine with just an introduction to physics that is very generally applicable to almost all learners, for example, in Europe. And another question, is the resource culturally appropriate? Especially given that some materials may be a little bit aged. It is not only about the look, the aesthetic of it, but also whether it's maybe culturally insensitive. And maybe it's very important to also have a look at that. Or maybe you can just make it so, adapt it in a way that it is actually more culturally appropriate, more sensitive. Then obviously licenses, I've touched upon that, that this is very important knowledge to have to be able to reuse or to create materials that others can reuse. You need to be aware of what the licenses allow, especially when we think about, for example, Creative Common licenses that have the attribute ND, non-derivative, which disallow actually reuse. So I would be very careful in using that. Maybe if you have one thing, for example, on one slide or one diagram where you like, I really want this to be this way, then maybe exclude it and maybe only put this specific thing under the ND license and everything under a more open license. So maybe keep everything as open as possible and only the stuff where you're like, I don't want this, for example, to be ripped out of context. Maybe then it would be sensible to put something under an ND license. Also very important is NC, non-commercial, which disallows commercial use. It is very important in that sense that in different countries there might be discrepancies what counts as commercial use or commercial purposes. So you should be aware that even non-commercial uses, for example, in public education, kind of could be disallowed. So if you want it open, just go with CC BY, CC BY SA. I would say are the really good open options that really encourage reuse. When it comes to media and formats, they also shape the reuse of open educational resources. Especially open educational resources are easily reusable if they're digital, because they can just be quickly be downloaded and uploaded again. They should be human readable, obvious, but increasingly should also be machine readable, because the creation of OER content with AI becomes increasingly more important. And if an AI is able to read your material, then it is more easily reused. Then open formats are obviously also very important in that they allow editing. One of the most prominent examples might be PDFs, which are very commonly shared, but are really a pain to modify. You really have to go in an editor and disrupt all the formats and just to grab something out of it or change something. If you just use a format that is editable from the start, then you just make it easier for others to use it. And especially if those open formats are editable in non-proprietary software. If you, for example, use .odt, you can others can use software where they don't have to pay a whole lot of money for to access that material. Another thing that can be very important is to include the prompts if you use Gen AI. First of all, to show that you use Gen AI, I think is important, not only for you for reuse, but generally. But if you want to make your Gen AI content reproducible, which is kind of like reuse, it's very important to just give the prompts so others can instruct their AI with a similar prompt and get a similar result. Not the same result because Gen AI is not deterministic, but that's another thing. When it comes to especially audiovisual media or pictures, it's very important to separate layers of the instead of providing joint media. For example, in images, you want to separate layers. And not smudge them into one PNG or JPEG, where others then have to edit those in, for example, Photoshop or GIMP, but instead can just take the different layers of the image and reuse whatever layer they want to reuse. The same goes with audio. For example, if you have a podcast which also includes music, maybe you have the rights to the music, maybe others don't. If you just separate the layers and just give the audio track of the voices and the audio of the music separately, people can decide whether they want to reuse the voices or the music or maybe both together. The same with audio. You want to separate the video and the audio tracks, use visual layering and also layered subtitles so each can be replaced. Because audiovisual media often is not prepared in that way, I want to give a little bit of outlook what, for example, we at TIB are working at, which is Tibava, better version of an AI-assisted audio and video analysis tool. And what you can see here is that it kind of does this separation of layers for you, in that it, for example, separates the audio waveform, so you could just use that. It analyzes different kinds of shots, so you could easily jump to a specific aspect that you want to show and exclude others, kind of to make it more easily searchable. And also separate layers as far as that's retrospectively possible, for example, to remove a logo, for example, of this news source here. Okay, that brings me neatly to technology and software. Open education needs open and up-to-date technology and software. One of the perks is open source and open education, I think, go hand in hand. And they also support digital sovereignty. So you don't have to support those big US companies that might in the future raise up a paywall and or even are not so much interested in data privacy. If you use open source, you have much more control over who benefits and whether you benefit. Also, open infrastructures, for example, like open educational research search indexes, allow easy connectivity. I've talked about, for example, about the ERSI, the search index. We, for example, offer an open source plugin, for example, for WordPress that you can, which is open source, which you can implement in your website to show a search for open educational resources, and which you can modify to your needs. You can add specific filters, you can include certain kinds of materials, exclude others, and I think that's the way to go. Especially because like this openness idea also allows interoperability among existing platforms and services. Still, even when it comes to open software, it's important to think about the longevity of development support and security updates. And I think that's very important for reuse, because up-to-date software is crucial to retain users' trust, both in terms of software security and data protection. If I have to download an open software that hasn't been updated in 15 years, to open up material for reuse, I'm probably going to decide against it, because it can be risk of security or data protection. So maybe look for open source software that is kept up to date. Another thing is logos and branding. We hear that a lot. Branding is important to funders, projects, institutions, and even individuals, and it even can serve to increase the perceived credibility and trustworthiness of the context as an indicator of quality. But there are easy ways to kind of avoid kind of the pitfalls of having a logo on every single slide. Maybe just publish a version without or with fewer logos. Just put the logos on the first slide only. Or make the logos easily removable. And then, maybe the most important, metadata, the bread and butter. Reusability is supported by, on the one hand, standardization and interoperable metadata schemes. There are a couple of them. I will not go into detail, given the time. But maybe the more important part is that providing informative and precise and complete metadata entries for each open educational resource and for collections in which they are contained is very important to make them findable and with that reusable. And that's where it gets a little bit tricky, because authors themselves are best positioned to supply the metadata. They're in the best position to describe what the materials they created contains. But often they're not too much in the world of metadata. They have to fill out many forms and kind of find precise titles, have to give the domain in which the content is. They have to provide information on what the function of the materials is, how the materials can be shared, the technical details, and a whole lot of that is a whole lot of work for educators. And I think librarians can very much support this here. Not in taking over the work, but in supporting educators and telling them, you describe the material, you make suggestions, and we help you to kind of fit that into the taxonomy, into the vocabulary that we provide. Maybe AI can also be very helpful here. There are different developments of using AI to read the content of open educational resources and make suggestions on metadata that could be put on that material, already kind of shape the way that librarians would recommend it. Okay, and that already brings us to challenges, opportunities for promoting reuse. Here shown as people climbing up an icy hill. This is more the theoretical part. Harry in a minute will take us to the empirical findings. Maybe some of this will overlap with it. Maybe some things will disagree with each other. But I think that is the fun part about working together on a workshop like this. Challenges for reuse. I've touched upon a couple of them already. For educators, I think one of the most prominent ones is doubts whether time and resources are saved is something that is open, is reused, as compared of doing it oneself. There is a certain transaction cost. And also whether one could just make it easy for oneself and use commercial options. And I think it's also very important to think about that educators ask themselves whether reusing existing materials adds or subtracts from my reputation. I don't know how that is in different countries. I would be really interested in to hear in the discussion about that. In Germany, there is, for example, this idea that especially newer or upcoming academics need to create their materials, especially the first ones themselves, kind of to show that they're able to do it. And that kind of sticks with them in the way that you don't just reuse other people's materials. You have to do it yourself to show that you're capable. And especially given limited time and resources, that might just not be the smartest way of doing it. You don't have to always show that you're capable of doing it. You can show that you're capable of doing it by showing that you're able to easily reuse a material, bring it up to date, add the stuff that you want to bring to into it, and then you're ready to go. As librarians, as I said, it's important to note that we can support, but we cannot do the work itself. We cannot reuse for other people. We have to support educators in reusing. And we need to track ways of reuse, and that can be very difficult. I'm quickly going to skip this because I'm already over time, I think. I want to quickly mention an opportunity that I see concerning the question, how can we track reuse? And I've had discussions with a couple of librarians, also from the Netherlands, Switzerland, recently, about the idea that we already have, as librarians, cataloging standards like, for example, RDA, and take that as an inspiration, because it already offers a vocabulary for relations among entities, such as contains, absorbed in part by, adapted as, or derivatives. And such relations could be used to track and visualize networks of relations. And that is also something we already do as librarians. Relation tracking is already in use, for example, in knowledge graphs. We at TAB, for example, have the Open Research Knowledge Graph, which connects different research papers with each other. And it actually uses a vocabulary to put different objects into a relation with each other. One important thing is that authors do not want to enter even more metadata on such relations. So we need to find a way to make that automatic. And I think AI could be very helpful here. If it would, for example, make a suggestion like, hey, have you seen this resource? What you are about to upload or what you are about to reuse is very similar to this. Is this maybe the source where you got it from? And then you just check a box, say yes, and it puts in the relation for you. I think that would be ways of making reuse easier and also making reuse more traceable. I also want to talk really quick about what could be incentives. How can we incentivize reuse? I think promoting the implementation of OER policies on different levels, like research groups, institutions, states, and nations, can be very important. But if that's not possible, maybe just mentioning open educational resources in open science policies. I think there is a great way on piggybacking on open science policies. Also making published OERs more visible, not only through metadata and search engines, but also, for example, via PIDs. Which, for example, at Twilio we already do. We give DOIs, and Zenodo also has stable URLs and stuff like that. I've talked about dark reuse. Support communities of practice as additional places of sharing and reuse. Maybe not only think about reuse, kind of the big one, but maybe the gray one, the one under the water, of like maybe sharing and reusing within an institution, or maybe not via a platform, but maybe via email or other ways, is already a great way to get people familiar with reusing materials, and maybe then they will end up reusing materials in a more prominent, more public way. And also encourage educators to share work in progress and smaller parts of their courses, because those are often much more easy to reuse, but often in a way that is more opaque to us. And many, many more. So I would give now the word to Harry, who is going to continue telling us about the challenges and opportunities for promoting reuse.
Thank you very much, David. Very interesting talk. Thank you for sharing your ideas and thoughts. Some of the things I want to tell you will be similar, some things will be different. I think David has a very broad approach, and then I will dive into the user approach. Could you please, David will manage the slides. So yes, the first slide is our rationale for research. Sylvia and myself and my colleague Roel has done research into sponsored by Npuls, which is a big Dutch investment scheme, into why or how would people reuse open educational resources. And what we really wanted to know is to get a deeper understanding of what motivates or discourages end users within a community from using open content, and whether they will or will not adapt it. And the idea was that if we would know more, that based on this deeper understanding, we could develop guidelines for the production of new content, and ultimately would increase the use of open content. Next slide, please. So if you have a teacher's perspective on the use of open educational resources, and we work a lot with teachers, I've been a teacher myself, and what you see is teachers are often under a lot of pressure. So they feel they have very little room to maneuver within a curriculum. And something doing different from what you already did will take you time and energy. That's something which David also says. You have to put in an effort, and is that effort worthwhile? So I think first, when teachers want to use open educational resources, they must feel the need to using other resources that are already available, and investing time and effort must pay off. So, in short, open educational resources must therefore offer added value. So if you want to increase the use of open educational resources, or the reuse, you have to think about the added value you have in the open educational resources you have in your different repositories. This is also based on theory, the practicality ethic from Doyle and Ponder, which has been in the 70s, which is still very much alive if you look at the way teachers work with materials in their classrooms. Next slide, please. So there's been some research in the Netherlands by Janssen et al. And this was in vocational, middle and higher education. And he distinguished 4 groups of teachers and support staff. And you could see 2 kinds of bars. You have the intensive use opposite to occasional use, and you have the occasional internal sharing versus the more intensive internal sharing. So look at the group on the right above, the ambassadors, that are mostly younger women, which are applied on bigger schools. They have a good experience with supplementary materials and often develop materials themselves, alone or together, and they share the materials very much. These are the ambassadors for our open educational resources. They share intensively and they use it intensively. On the opposite, you have the hesitant, and often they're men, and they work in secondary vocational education, have a lot of work experience, are mostly employed in smaller schools, and develop very little material and don't share anything or share very little. And that's are the hesitant. Then you have the social group, which share a lot, intense internal sharing, very often work in secondary vocational education, medium-sized schools have positive experience and often develop materials together. And the later the other one is the pragmatist. It's the oldest group. They often develop materials themselves, often use supplementary materials, but have very many positive experiences. The difference between these groups is, for example, in the size of the schools, but also gender and age seem to matter in these kind of things. The culture within the school has also very much influence in how intensively you will use material and how intensively you will share it. Next slide, please. And this is a slide also from the same research from Janssen. And you see two types of bars. You see the orange bar that are the occasional regular users, and the blue ones is the none of rare users. And if you look at, I hope you can read it, I will share a more sizable picture with Paula later. What you can see, it's for both groups very difficult to determine the level of the material. And as David said earlier, it's very important that people know if it's suited for the audience you intend to use it. So that's an important thing. And it's also difficult to determine reliability or quality. And the lack of an overarching platform is for both groups very important, especially for the non-users. Almost more than 50% says that's a major obstacle in reusing materials. And if you are a user, the difficulty to adapt materials or the support you could get from your colleagues or the acceptance within a school are also factors which can limit the level of reuse. So this is a very interesting picture that you can see. There are some differences, but a lot of similarities between non-users and regular users, which could help us to deeper understand why materials are used or reused or not. Next slide, please. So if you look from a psychological perspective, we have the unified theory of acceptance and use of technology, and you see there are a couple of major factors. The performance expectancy. What do you think the materials will add to what you already do? Or the effort expectancy. What do you have to do to make the material fit to your needs? And also the social influence. If there's a large group among you who will say, that's a good thing to use, or say, no, we have our own materials. Why do you use something else? That all matters in the factor of reuse. The facilitating conditions are also important, but behavioral intention should not be underestimated. I think if we as producers understand better what are the motivational factors, then we can also address the behavioral intention of our end users and therefore enhance the reuse of our open educational research materials. Of course, gender, age, experience, and voluntariness of use are also factors, but I think if you have more understanding of the performance and effort expectancy and the social influence, you could make a big difference in your public, in your audience. Next, please. So one of the models we use to understand how the actual, how the process of the first impression to actual use goes is the division of innovation model of Rogers. And he says simply, first you have to have knowledge of the materials to be able to use them, to choose if you want to use them. Then you have to be persuaded to use them. And then the perceived characteristics of innovations are very important. So does the material has a relative advantage to what you already use? Is it compatible to what you want or what you already did? Is it not too complex? Could you try it out? Is the triability big enough? Could you fit it into your own context? And observability is it visible for everybody in the classroom or outside that you're doing a new good thing? And again, if you look at the previous slide, the social acceptance is a very important factor as well for people to reuse open educational materials. If you're convinced, if you're persuaded, then you will decide either to adopt or to reject it. Next slide, please. So we did a research, and our research objectives were the following. We tried to deeper understand which factors would support the reuse of open educational research materials from a teacher perspective. So we developed instruments to capture the process of orientation, adaptation, and adaptation of open educational research resources. And we tested it with domain-specific stakeholders. And the outcome of the research was also that we could have some recommendation for the building of collections of open educational research materials. Next slide, please. We developed 3 instruments. Part 1 is the orientation. If you were looking for open educational research materials, what is the first impression you have when you encounter one? The second one is an instrument to capture, is it fit for use or not? So adaptation screening. To what extent do the open educational research materials match what I'm looking for? And part 3 is, if I found something which might be fit for use, what is needed to tailor that material to my personal needs, and how much effort would it take for me? So in the next slides, we have a little bit more examples of that. Could you do the next one? Yeah. Oh, for example, what we did is we had the 3 instruments, and we asked all participants first to use instrument 1, which is the orientation, to check a number of educational and research materials. And if they thought, oh, that might be something, they could use instrument 2. And if they thought, well, yes, this is fit for use, then they used instrument 3. And instrument 3 is then, how do I need to tailor it to my needs? But you can also stop and go to the next material. So every material would be screened in instrument 1, and then might go to instrument 2 or might go to instrument 3. I'll tell you a little bit more how many materials went into the latest stage. Next slide, please. So this is instrument 1, and I translated, it was in a Google Docs format, Microsoft Forms, I don't know. And there were a couple of questions. So if you were looking at materials, they had to ask themselves, what kind of target audience I'm looking for? Again, what David said, it's important for teachers that they know where are they looking for who, what is your audience? And for what purpose do I seek the material? And what kind of learning objectives should the materials address? And what is the expected added value of the materials compared to what I already have? Because a lot of teachers, especially in the Netherlands, work already with some curriculum materials, often commercial. So what is it, what you are missing in that? And what kind of learning materials am I looking for? And I had some options like, would it be an image? Would it be a quiz? Would it be extra text? Whatever. So they had some options to fill in there. And the requirements. What kind of requirements must the open educational research materials meet for me? When they checked the materials, the last question they had to tick the box was, what is the most important factor for me to decide why, if and to use it? Now, that was the first instrument. Could you please do the second? Okay, the second one is, the second material is it fit for use or not for you, or not fit for use? We first asked which material are you screening, and we asked them to pull in the URL so we could look at what materials they were screening, and then they could tick a lot of boxes. And the items was, does it fit purpose, population, and context? Do objectives and structure provide sufficient guidance? Can I tailor it? Can I tweak it to my needs? Does it offer added value to what I already have or to what I already do? Does it make my teaching quality visible? Does it require much effort, time, and resources? And do I have that time and effort and resources? And you could see it not, but you could say not, totally not, a little, somewhat, and a lot. That were the options they could choose. And the last question was, based on this, oh, sorry, one back, please. Based on this, I'm considering looking into the subject in greater depth. So they could choose at the end of instrument 2, okay, Well, I thought it was something, maybe not, or yes, this is something definitely I want to look further into. And then the next slide, you could see the third, thank you, David, the third instrument. And again, which material are we screening? And then we had a kind of matrix in which they could say, well, with this material, I particularly need to offload the learning objectives. The learning objectives are already good. I don't have to do anything, or maybe should add something or omit something or modify, but they could choose what they needed to do with specific parts of the materials. Could be the learning objectives or the learning content. Like David said before, you could say the learning objectives might be good, but the learning content must be modified or added or whatever. The teaching resources might be something you would like to offload or modify. The forms of organization, the learning environment for which it was made, the planning and time, the assessment and the role of the teacher. All aspects of the material you might or not want to modify yourself. So, and questions beyond that was how much time and effort does it take to adapt it? And what is your conclusion based on those questions? What do I need to do? And how much time and effort does it take? Okay, and based on that, they would decide whether or not to use that material. So the three instruments gave you a first quick round, what kind of materials are there? And then the second look was more in depth, okay, is this really fit or not? And then if you thought it would be fit, then you could decide, does it need a lot of attention from me? What time of effort does it cost me on which kind of elements in the materials? And then, okay, I will do it or not. That was in fact the flow of the instruments. Next slide, please. So in total, 30 materials were screened by the first instrument. And you saw after the first round, we saw that 20 materials were adopted for the second instrument. So they did adoption screening. And after the third instrument, there were 10. Now, after the second instrument, 10 were also the instrument had the adaptation screening. And in the end, only 7 of the 30 materials had a positive decision for reuse. So you could say the first orientation only brought in 20. After the third thorough screening, 10 remained. And even then, they would say, okay, only 7 are good enough for me, are worth my time and effort, and have added value for my practice. So a lot of materials were not that well received. And again, you could say there was a reasonable amount of our materials which were fitted. Well, what did we find? We also, could you please go to the next slide? So we also had discussions after we analyzed the data from the instruments, but we also had discussions with the users of the instruments. And we talked to what is the instrument doing for you? And then we found out that users have various objectives when searching. Like David said, you could have the dark reuse. Some people just are looking for inspiration, might not use the materials themselves, but look at things, oh, this is what could be done. Interesting. And some people are really looking for materials to enrich one's lessons. But they were particularly searching for small resources, which were not always available. And some teachers were seeking for resources for students, so they could study on themselves, which were sometimes available and sometimes not, depending on the collection. Another interesting finding was that the content often determines what teachers are looking for. And if they were looking for very specific content-related objectives, it was hard to find materials. And if they were there, sometimes they were not of the desired quality. For example, in terms of content or format, the layer thing, what David referred to, we have a very nice picture, but I cannot see the different layers, and I only need layer 3 and 5. So then it was difficult to decide, can I use it or not? And the search function in some collections didn't work properly. So they couldn't find what they were looking for. So they had to scroll through all the materials, which is really a pain. It is not something you want to do. And then teachers lost interest. Another thing we found out in orientation phase is that the metadata for materials did not always meet the requirements because the description was not specific enough, especially for bigger materials. It was a lesson about information literacy and AI, but not what it exactly was about. And teachers were missing categories like engaging teaching methods, test questions, and stuff like that. Next slide, please. In the second instrument, the screening, we had also discussed this with our participants. And what they found out, materials don't seem to offer much added value compared to the current situation. So they were all thinking, okay, I do this already. What does it add to this? Is the content sufficient of quality? Or if it was a visual material, is the quality of design of a solution sufficient? Again, something David mentioned in his part of it, the talk. And another thing which was very important was the ability to adapt. We also saw this in this graph with the users. Ability to adapt is something teachers really want to have. How easy is it to customize layers, components, and what teachers were missing is they would like to have resources as learning activities, and they couldn't find them in the materials, or if they could find them, that were not easy to adapt. Another question teachers had is, okay, I have this material, can I integrate it into my own learning environment? And how do I do that? And the ability to adapt sourcing material takes time and effort, and sometimes it's not really worth the trouble to do so, or is it not available? So that was the results of the screening. And the last thing was the last instrument, how to make it fit. What teachers or what our participants said, the supplementary materials must align with learning objectives. That's essential. If it doesn't, well, quit. That's something David also said. And it's not only the learning objectives, also the learning activities and the learning assessment. So there's a constructive alignment between those three, which somewhere the supplementary materials must fit in, either as objectives, either as learning activities, or either as assessment, or all three. And there was a big desire to make learning content accessible at aggregation levels 1 and 2, which is the smaller parts. And is particularly relevant in the context of information literacy, which was one of the research groups. They had only really big chunks of information, whole lessons, and it was very hard to see, okay, this is a nice graph, or this is a nice quiz, or this might be a good exercise as an introduction to a certain topic. And it was very hard to find that in the materials. You had to dive into it. So, okay, next slide, please. What was also interesting and something a little bit unexpected is that what the impact was on the collection owners, because our participants were all not only makers of materials and users, but they also were collection owners. And they gave, by using those three instruments, they gave them newest perspective on themselves as makers and as reusers. And they got a growing awareness what is actually needed for material ready for reuse. So you might be a collection owner and make a lot of materials, but you haven't stepped into the perspective of an end user. And that perspective makes things a little clearer. Oh, this might be nice because I made it, but somebody else might not think that because it's not really accessible, or it's not really good metadata, or it's too big, or it's maybe too specific. That was really interesting to see that it helped researching your own collection using the instruments gave the collection owners a totally new perspective on their own collections. So what are the obstacles for reuse? The user friendliness, like finding information. They really want more information on teaching methods. What can I do in the classroom? Both dark reuse, so as inspiration as actual use, and the ability to integrate it into your own digital learning environment, which is more and more predominant in many institutions in middle and higher education. The technical quality, zooming in, zooming out, for example, in pictures in medical education. The content quality, which is sometimes an alignment with the learning goals, but sometimes something also on the specificity of certain content. And the alignment with teachers' needs. In fact, what we saw is that people were looking for things which were not yet in the collection or not really well metadated, like test questions, engaging teach methods, or sometimes the objectives were not clear at all. So you couldn't really estimate if it's possible to use it in my lessons in my school. And the level aggregation, just like I said before, and collections that mainly contain extensive resources are not that user-friendly and don't really invite for reuse. There's a big need for bite-sized resources as enriched materials. I think I'm going to the last slide now. Yes. Well, we have a lot of recommendations, and Sylvia will take us a little further in that. I'll only say the categories. The findability of learning materials is an important thing. So reuse can be enhanced by improving the discoverability of resources. So if you quickly get an overview or a quick understanding of the purpose, or you can select by type of material, get results really quickly. So the findability is a very major part. And reuse of collections enhanced when content is tailored to the user's various needs. We saw also that users might have different needs. If you want inspiration, you should be able to look for inspiration and not only for use as partial use. So uses for inspiration are lesson ideas, detailed modules, courses, lessons, material to enrich the learners want smaller units, bite-sized snippets. For users looking for research for students, open educational resources must be added value compared to existing materials. The quality is also one of the factors that influence the reuse. Now, like I said before, aligned with intended objectives, easy to adapt, integratable in your own learning environment, providing engaging activities, teachers, medic or assessment questions, and a high resolution or high quality, multiple customizable layers if it's an image material. And a shift in perspective was, I think, one of the most interesting things we found in our research is that if you step in the perspective of a user, you might think that the materials you have put into your collection could be so much better metadated or more accessible or have added value by understanding what a user might look into when you're having your collection open for them. So this is my part of the story, but we didn't do it alone. Sylvia has been a major contributor to our research. So I give the word now to Sylvia. Sylvia.
Thank you so much, Harry. Yeah, if we can go back to the blue slide, please, then I can have an introduction. Thank you, David, to the point we'll talk about in not longer than 5 minutes. I'll make it short. It was very nice to do this together with Harry and Roel. We learned a lot about collections, communities, domain-specific communities, how they operate and what they achieve and what they really achieve when the material is out there. And based on this research, we make the first steps to see if we can help them further, because insights are wonderful, but then you have to act. Then you have to do something to support them. So we made the first steps on 2 topics, and that are the first 2 topics in this slide. The findability we are working on to improve that already for a longer period of time, but now with an MCP. I did give a workshop about that before. I think on my top of my head it was workshop 13, if I'm not mistaken, about AI, how you can use that to find materials that are more based for your learning context. So that's one thing we are working now on in a trial setting to see what is the quality of the MCP and AI in that spectrum. And the second one is that Harry said people would like to find the materials to the teaching methods, to the assignments, to the number of students. And we did not have that possibility to give the metadata very easily on. So I made the first step in setting up a vocabulary, so a standardized hierarchical list with elements that can be used. It is published as a linked data set and can be integrated in platforms. And it will also be in English, so it's reusable for everyone. And we see the first setup for that on the next slide. So it's maybe not readable for you, but I try to give an idea. Here on the left side, you see do you see the Bloom's taxonomy structure? And then here you see all kinds of teaching methods and types of assignments in classroom. This structure, not the hierarchy, but this information is developed by the University of Utrecht. And I looked at it and think, oh, that is a very good setup. I will try to make a linked data set out of it. And I also looked in the time you have with students in class and how many students are there. So I made categories of that, and when you combine certain things, you can this type of information will be integrated in the repository. So you can click through the list, add the metadata on it, and once you do that, it will be automated, findable in collections of type of activities, and you can filter on the new number of students and time. We can see in the next slide, you can see them here in a row. So for example, the lightning talk, then you see the definition of what it is, and you see the categories from the previous slides with what type of activity it is and for how long in time and how many students. And then you see it's for a work group of a practicum. So these are the first steps in setting up a taxonomy to help the librarians and to teachers to really make low accessibility collections. If you have a domain specific community, you can also work with this. And I hope it will be published around the summer. So in the new year, teachers and librarians can use this for creating their collections. So that's my 5 minutes of extra insight in this. And on the quality of material, we give advice. And tomorrow I have a presentation on co-workers of Npuls program. In Npuls, where institutions get money to start up and sharing their open educational resources, and boost your collection to improve the collection of domain-specific communities. We give them the advice so they can integrate the insights into the guidelines for the proposals. So we work via the two lines in the Npuls programs. Yeah. Are there further any questions from you or comments?
So there was a question from Esther, and you already provided partially an answer. Sylvia, I want to reiterate the question for David and Harry if you have any additional suggestion. Esther asked, as someone responsible for an OER repository, I find dealing with the issue of outdated media difficult. How can I, as a non-expert, make this assessment? What criteria can be developed, or do such criteria already exist? How do I handle this material? And Sylvia already answered that there is a life cycle framework for OER, and she shared the link in the chat from Npuls. But David and Harry, you might have any additional comment to that. So I just want to reiterate that question.
Thank you, Paula.
Yeah, sure. If I may, coming also from a repository, I'm also concerned with that question. And I think it's something repositories have to think about as an interactive structure within the repositories, because I think the experts within the domain are best placed to assess the actuality, the outdatedness of materials best. I think we as librarians might have some ideas about that, but I think it's very difficult for us to assess, given that depending on which context a resource is used, the answer might just be very different. For example, basics in physics might not be outdated in the next 10 years, while research on AI might be outdated tomorrow. So I think a solution we should think about, and I don't have a solution for it yet, is to have structures within repositories for other reusers, or even not reusers, just people who looked at and downloaded materials to give an input on whether they think it's outdated or not, some kinds of response system. We, for example, at Twilio have a comment system, which sadly is not used for that purpose, but we would very much encourage people to use it for that, because I think it would be very helpful in just one view, be able to see whether a resource is just there because it was uploaded some time ago, or it is there and can be used ready to go for the next lecture or for the next workshop you're giving.
Based on that, David, based on what you say, what I found out so far from the librarian perspective is the librarians can help with the versioning of materials. Which version is it, the newest version or something based older? Because sometimes people want to have, for example, the first edition of an open textbook, but also are interested in the second one and are very interested to see if they want to replace it or not, or the material based in the classroom is too much relying on the first edition. So the librarians can help in that perspective very much, but the life cycle management goes further than that, goes into the institutions, goes into the domain specific groups to look at your materials. How actual is it? What do we do? And the life cycle management tool helps you through that cycle. And the librarian has part in some elements of that life cycle. So there is a collaboration needed. Sorry, Harry.
No, it's thank you for elaborate. I only wanted to say, from a perspective of end users, if you use the screening instrument, the first instrument, you will often see that people will discard materials which are too old. So if you could monitor how often material is seen and not looked into a little bit further, then you would have a lot of evidence, or at least a signal for, hey, this material, it has been opened, but it hasn't been clicked on, or it hasn't been downloaded. That's also an important indicator in that life cycle. Okay, but sometimes old materials can be very, very powerful. I mean, historians, we love old materials, and old materials could be very valuable. So it's not only about age, it's also about use. If it's used, it's not outdated. If it's not used, the likeliness that it's outdated is a lot bigger.
Yeah, absolutely. Very good point. Thank you, Harry. Yes. Are there any more questions or comments? Oh, Robert, can you maybe speak up, Robert?
Please, Robert.
Yes, I have to find the buttons to click. Yes,
Here
I
you
want
are.
to.
Nice to
I
see
want.
you.
Hi. I want to react to something David told about beginning teachers creating their own materials, and you asked whether or not these are in other contexts maybe different. Well, that reminded me of the research Marion Baas and myself have done around 2020. With in higher education was a survey research which we published. I have the link to the paper here under, and we found exactly the opposite. actually. That it had more than 400 teachers we had filled in this survey, and well, and we found we thought about some explanations. So maybe yeah, what do you think of this compared to what you have experienced?
Yeah, absolutely. What I said there was, I think, very specific for the German context, and I think maybe I should have said a little bit more about it because I think it is in a way in Germany this idea of you have to. I think the willingness to share is greater in younger educators. So I think that aligns with I think what you said. But I think then creeps in kind of this idea once younger educators are longer in the academic system that they have to prove themselves, that they have to show their own work, and they kind of get trained actually implicitly not to share. So that might be the move that then kind of pushes back on that. So I would kind of not make a blanket statement there, even concerning Germany, but that's kind of the experience I just anecdotally made. That initially young academics come in and go, yeah, I want to share, I'm willing to share, and then the leaders of the institute would go like, well, no, the first lecture you have to do yourself. So we know you're doing it correctly, and then kind of this, and you also have to publish yourself, your own work. So they kind of get trained to actually not share. That is kind of my experience. That initially younger people start out wanting to share, and then institutional and personal and social pressures actually kind of discourage that. And so I would not see much of a disagreement between us in that specific point.
No, because you talk about sharing and creating the materials on their own, and this was a research on reuse.
Ah,
So
okay.
I did not study in this research about whether or not younger or more experienced teachers have a difference in sharing the materials.
Okay.
That's another kind of research, I guess.
Yes,
Okay.
what we found in previous research in the Netherlands, we see that the culture of a school is very important in a social context. If the social context is warm and is inviting and is welcoming and is enhancing the use and reuse of materials, and it's not about the reputation, but about making an impact on your students and finding the right materials, additional materials. It could be an added bonus, but it could also be a threat to your authority. So it depends on the culture which is in a specific institute.
Yeah.
And even within bigger institutes, it could be different between departments. The one department is very open and very welcoming, and the other is less. So I think there has to be a kind of a it's more like a culture change you need to foster, and will take time for whole education, for all educators to embrace open educational. But I think it's something that needs to be done, and especially in the time of AI, you could not say I cannot reuse materials. You will know that in the coming 10 years, all teachers will reuse materials, either by AI or from open educational resource repositories. So that is a change which supports the sharing idea. How you would share, how you should share it, how you should reuse it. I think that's something for us to support and to bring further.
Yeah, last year I did a literature study about reuse to find out which factors influence reuse, and also how you can encourage those factors that positively have a positive effect on reusing OER can be implemented in an institution. Maybe I can share the link to the report about this, because that's also has a kind of overlap with what David has told about the preconditions for reuse. And the main things, two main things I found there, and that is from literature, is that the main factor is trust in the quality of the learning materials. That's essential. If the teacher don't have this trust, and you can encourage this trust. You can do many things to enhance this trust for teachers. And the second thing is what you also mentioned, Harry, and it's called an open culture. An open culture, and that's maybe a vague description, but you can. I've put in this report a description of open culture, which is based on also on literature, what I found in literature.
Interesting. Share a link if you would.
Yeah, I will look it up. It's yeah.
Thank you.
Thanks, Robert.
It's actually an English translation from a report. From the report, it was also in an as an for Npuls. I did this.
Okay.
So we were supposed to have some activities in the breakout rooms, but maybe we have only a couple of minutes left. So maybe we can ask the questions to the plenary room if you think it's good, Sylvia and David.
Yeah, sure.
Sure.
Shall I read them? Okay, so the questions we had for the group discussions was, do you know of or are involved in projects facing challenges of reuse, and what are the challenges specifically that you face? What opportunities and incentives do you plan or already implement to overcome these challenges? And 3, are some of the insights and knowledge we provided today maybe helpful for your own situation? And if not, what do you like to have? What insights, what knowledge would you want to have? What research needs to be done to study reuse? Maybe you have some ideas about that.
So if I may, let me give it a start briefly with my Polini hat on. Teachers very often, when we encourage them to reuse resources from others, they have issues around the quality of those resources, and they have issues about having less time to think about their own because they need to look into the other ones. So this is a common challenge. The second one is something that, but please tell me what you think. It is time. It is the same time that you would need to assess resources that are not open. The first part of the problem is a fake one, because it's the same challenge that you would encounter with resources that are protected, but in this case you are allowed to. So you skip the stage when you need to reach out to the authors and ask specific permission. But if you have more, and I see that we also have someone writing in the chat, so please prioritize them in case. Oh no, these are thankful comments for your webinar. So, I mean, this is the experience that I had at Polimi, but I don't know if you have different experiences.
If I may jump in there real quick, yeah, I absolutely agree. I think it is just a problem that has been hidden when we talked about closed materials, because it was just not possible in an easy sense. And now with open educational resources, we have that problem. And actually, I think it's a very good problem to have. And especially if we think about dark reuse, it's in a way similar. That we're not able to track it does not mean that it does not exist. And what we have seen today, I think there is good reason to believe that there are many ways of reusing that just not qualify under that very traditional umbrella of, well, take a material, modify specific things, and almost unchanged use it in a teaching context. No, it's much more complex than that.
Yeah, can I add to that? As a teacher educator, we always said that closed materials make teachers very dependent on a curriculum which is covered by textbooks, and open educational resources make people more aware that they are the persons in the class. They should interpret the textbooks. They should make pedagogical sound decisions. They need pedagogical design capacity to use the right materials at the right place for the right students. And that's something which is a story within Dutch higher education, especially teacher education, has been sent out for many of, and this is enforced by the open educational resource movement. So I think it's a good thing. And yes, it's a challenging thing, and we're not there yet, but I think these two forces reinforce each other. For example, for teachers as end users, they're the professionals. They should make the right decisions. We should enforce their pedagogical design capacity for working in the classrooms, and the open educational resources should be able to make that decisions and not say, okay, this is the textbook, I have to do this. No, I can make my decisions myself.
I would add just what Rabin just posted into the chat. I get the impression that many of our teachers simply do not know that what open materials exist. Our job as librarians is to help them find these materials, but it means taking a very proactive stance, which I can totally only subscribe to.
Yes, and show them the added value for their own practice. Say you're in control, not the textbook maker, not the publisher. You are in control, and that's something which open. And I think that should be the campaign, the PR for open educational resource materials, at least in education. Then.
Yeah, and that also is supported by Paul Gobet. He was also in one of our workshops, and he said librarians also have to be more conscious about what do you buy in from commercial partners and what are you supporting in open and in reuse. Just try to break that cycle of automatism, like buying in via licenses, because otherwise, if there's a lot of commercial materials, it's all the teachers are also not challenged to make any move because they are supported in an old system, you can say.
Yeah, it's true.
So thank you all. Our time is really up now, and I'm grateful for Sylvia's, David's, and Harry's insightful workshop today. I'm learning a lot from you, so thank you again. And thank you for all the people who are in the room and those who have left already, because it's always good to discuss and to have your insights from experience and practical, contextual experienced, let's say, research fields, because in many ways that's what's happening around us. So thank you again, and looking forward to our next opportunity to be together in this. Have a nice day.
Thank you. Thank you for having us. Bye bye.
Thank you.